Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.
Wow, they really made a point of it to make the drop in status from captain to first mate severe, didn't they? The captain gets a big room with a view, the officers mostly get cramped cabins, and the rest of them are crammed together, suspended above cannons in hammocks, which will hurt when it snaps in a YouTube video fashion. I rarely considered how Spartan conditions on a ship like this had to be, but 60 passengers and crew, plus cargo, this was necessary. A lot of people even opted to go off the side of the boat to feed the marine life and help in giving a small percentage of the boat a new paint job. This grim setting is the good ship Obra Dinn in the 1800s. It's returned as a ghost ship with most of the crew's fate unaccounted for, and it's up to you to figure out what happened to all of them. But how? There are no available witnesses, and it's the 1800s aboard a weather-beaten ship, so you have very little access to physical evidence. Enter your magic pocket watch that displays the scene at the moment of a person's demise. Once you use it on their corpse or where their essence has left their mark or something, yeah, they don't explain the nature of the pocket watch. It just seems to exist in this fantasy maritime world with Kraken, merfolk, and the product of having a nightmare when you fall asleep watching an ad with the Dulux dog in it. But why have you been given this task? Allowed to use such objects of power? Why? Because you're an insurance agent. You're here to determine whether or not the company should pay up. Arguably a uniquely humble protagonist for the tale. Let's start with the obviously unique and brilliant visuals, sometimes reminding me of early wire graphics. Green and white looks like a Game Boy in 3D, and if you prefer, other formats are available. And as mentioned, it seems to show a ship this kind realistically, at the very least spatially. I'm no historian, but it looks ship-shape in Bristol fashion, except for some of the paper-thin walls. Wait, that's a trick of the light. And the fact that usually, during whatever scene or chapter you are, there aren't that many souls living in that space at one time. But that's probably at least partially due to practical puzzling reasons, would be including a lot of irrelevant information otherwise, making the puzzle harder to solve, or maybe even easier, and at very least just disrupt the flow. And it's also kind of impressive that even though these faces don't have that much detail, and there isn't much use of tone, you can accurately discern a lot of these characters as unique entities. Looks nice, but for those of you who would prefer to see more nautical stereotypes, I'm going to have to disappoint you. There's not one eye patch, peg leg, or hygiene issue in sight, apart from the mentioned boat painting. Although one of them does seem to have a pet monkey. The only real visual issue is the grainy haze that's present at times, as well as the edginess of some of the lines, but the latter at least is arguably not a problem because that's wire graphics. But fair warning at the start, these granules gave me some eye itch, like sand teleporting into my eyes. Just please be aware, I do believe I got used to it. Gameplay wise, it's brilliant. You need to figure out who died how, and by whom. And as a great many players have noticed, it's like an extreme smarter version of Cluedo, what some other countries call Clue. I'm not sure why we required Homer's suffix, but there's a fun fact for you. And this puzzling exercise requires logic and deduction. And the brilliance is, unlike usually is the case with this approach, in puzzle games they don't make it too easy or straightforward. It's intelligent and has challenge to it. Evidence is important, but sometimes, as the game says, so is the process of elimination. You have a crew log that gives all their names and nationalities, jobs. You hear someone speak a specific language. You might think odds are good they come from that country. And if the rest of the people on board with that nationality have already been accounted for, it might be a good idea to use the process of elimination to get the culprit. Some people can be cliquey, with people that are from the same place or the same rank. Sometimes you can actually attempt to determine the culprit using their accent.
Oh no! You're cut!
Don't leave me.
Bear up, son. I'll stay with you.
Use the glossary to see the definition of the different jobs and ranks. He's working here. Thus it may be a logical assumption to assume that this is the person. These tend to be the tier 3 deductions, the hardest ones, but others are easier. On incredibly rare occasions, you get the best case scenario of someone actually being called by their name. It takes 3 completely correct crew member identifications for the game to confirm you're right. That decreases the viability of guessing by testing out a bunch of relevant possibilities, but not completely. If you're sure or pretty sure that the previous two are correct, and you may be missing only a few bits of information for the last one, cycling through it may eventually give your answer, especially if you figure out enough to know it can only be one of so many possible answers. Say you're close to the end of the game, there are only a few unnamed crew members left, and you only need the who, and thus eventually through the cycling, you'll get the correct trigger. I really tried to avoid doing this earlier, but it's an extensive enough challenge that it didn't feel like cheating too much when I did it at the end. Earlier, maybe it's a bit cheap. Some assumptions are big leaps, some are small, but almost all of those are based on some kind of logic and can be deduced in some sort of way, at least partially, before you have to switch over to elimination. In fact, I missed some of the more subtle clues at first, made some leaps and guesses based on stereotypes and elimination, and even if that wasn't completely ineffective, I did see later that for most things there actually is empirical evidence you can look at. Solving the fates of these passengers and crew are all that you do, but it's incredibly engrossing, a single goal that fires up the brain and truly requires you to reason in so many different ways. I never felt like it was impossible. When my brain heat increased, I could try and figure out some other fates again, in previous chapters for instance, with fresh eyes and new ideas. It could be soothing when I was right, or at least made some headway, but in all fairness, I was well and truly up for this game. Even the annoying moments when I couldn't, for instance, make out the murder method was ultimately my fault. They showed it in a previous chapter, yet I was dead set on strangulation, which is delightfully bizarre for a sentence that still makes sense. If you're not willing to admit your own folly, this game is not for you. The audio design is great, the visuals as said are great, but they're important, they serve a function, they're a hard and fast thing. Static, with almost no capacity for imagination or dynamic movement. And that's where the audio comes in. Plus, of course, it makes it harder. You don't know who's talking unless it's made obvious through, say, gurgling sounds, and that's where investigation steps in. Followed by the lovely, yet odd music. It's a big orchestral sound. Listen to that Space Odyssey drum. And lovely organ. Arguably, it's nautical in a more subtle way. I believe all the parts of a chapter are set to the same track, which is why it can be odd musically, as there are times when it stokes adventure, even when horrific things are happening.
Good feel.
It does go dreadful on occasion, but the more playful elements can really shine. I mean, Soldiers of the Sea plays a bell tune. And there are sound cues that tickle your reward centers, like this one that begs you to solve the puzzle. But I suppose this isn't bad. You have to deal with a lot of death in this game. Perhaps it's for the best that not everything is draped in misery. Story-wise, the how and the why wasn't that unpredictable. Not really. I mean, you step onto a ghost ship. What percentage of these 60 people do you imagine had happy endings? And it's not told chronologically, but the sequence in which you are fed story parts is perfect somehow. And it's intriguing because of that order. Makes the messing with forces beyond your ken thing more palatable. Even if on paper where it ends doesn't sound that profound, but good show, it's probably the best possible place the tale could have ended. You do delight in figuring it out, and can connect to the crew while you do. Some characters are in multiple memories. I remember you. You do a lot on the ship. Aren't afraid of a scrap. And some deaths can be surprisingly affecting, when you realize the foolish reasons therefore, them being human-induced. Somehow accidents aren't really affecting, they just sort of happen, as though through this story, I was like, good. Getting crushed by a box is nothing, at least when you compare it to the other deaths. Thus, they have a higher chance of being funny, but they're not funny, even in the one weird situation where humor seemed to be the intention. I really didn't expect toilet humor from a game that had absolutely no other levity in it whatsoever. Apart from the music, it's the downward spiral and an opportunity for you to put on your detective hat. Their misery is your fun. The story is enough to help this not feel like a pure puzzler, which probably helped me not give up when the brain heat increased. The game is really fun. I started playing on a Saturday or Sunday and completed it in one 13-hour session, which isn't really a bad puzzle game length. Not great, but not bad. It is cheap on Steam, 185 Rand full price, 111 Rand on sale. That's 8 Rand 54 cents per hour of gameplay, which is quite bad, but arguably the game is still fairly new. The developer knows what they have here. A cheaper sale may eventually arise, and to download it isn't that bad, as it only takes up 2.03 gigabytes on the hard drive. One or under is always better, but this is doable, I suppose. And it's a delightful addition to the games that work on the Warhorse. On the OS settings, I got 30 to 33 frames per second. In memories, 26 to 29 frames per second when just moving around on the boat up top. Can dip to 22 to 24 frames per second when getting the watch out near a corpse. But you can change the graphics to sharp. That improves it a fair bit, and I'd say it's playable. And I believe you can make it even smoother by turning on sharp 1 if you can play that way. And stereotypically, it isn't the kid-friendliest. People do get ripped apart, and I practice a more steamrolly version of political correctness, as in just because someone speaks a language, that doesn't necessarily mean they come from a specific country or look a specific way. So I tried to avoid that kind of deduction, but I did knuckle under, especially with the group from Formosa, a country I assume doesn't exist anymore. I was like, these symbols reminds me of kanji, based on my incredibly limited experience with kanji, thus I assumed it was a stereotypically Asian language, and thus chose to assume the speakers were Asian, and stuff like that. But thinking stuff like that is literally a sin to me, so I really try to avoid it. So much so that instead of doing that, I tried identifying some characters by comparing their shoes, which arguably is amusing. Some people may have a different opinion, but noticing stuff like this is just recognizing difference, and in all fairness, even if this approach bothers you, too, I believe there are empirical methods of figuring the answers out, at least partially, but as said, it took me a while to notice one of them, and it probably will be harder in general, or at least draining. As said, I knuckled under. Also, in the starting letter you receive, they use the word orient, which some people will also dislike, and as mentioned at the start, I did experience some eye itch, but it did fade for me after a while. But please be aware, the game has very striking and beautiful visuals, beautiful green and white wire graphics, unique, and the ship is designed in a fairly logical manner, as deigned by me, the non-shipwright. It may have some issues like grainy edginess, but nothing major. It has great audio design that paints a mental picture, and some nice instrumental music to add a nautical feel of adventure and peril, and probably not in an on-the-nose kind of way. Big sound. Lovely. Maybe a bit tonally strange when the more playful tracks play during tragedy. It has a great unique approach to puzzle gameplay that manages to be logical but still challenging, requiring deduction and reason, but in a way that stems from a story, so that it doesn't just become a sort of pure puzzling experience. Severely satisfying, and probably will keep you on the hook even during moments where you're frustrated and tired. Or at the very least, it does that better than a pure puzzler. On the maybe side, the story is okay. Well, that's a bit harsh. It's more like you could probably guess the big picture before you have all the information. And the story a lot of times involves multiple sections of a battle, which is awesome a lot of times, but not necessarily the most plot-driven thing, and I suppose that which is not is written in a way to make it understandable and descriptive, comprehensible. But we do care about the fates of the crew when they're brought about by the greed and petty squabbles of people. But some deaths, accidents especially, are just more detective work. Good thing the detective work is fun. Some deaths can, as said, be affecting, with more emotion. And the order of information reveal is perfect, even if there is a section, I believe, where you can access multiple chapters unrestricted, so you may need to keep your wits about you. And arguably this approach is intriguing, even if the mystery is relayed through technically small pieces of time. I mean, if you were to play the audio section sequentially, I would be surprised if it reached an hour in length. This is all the game is. It's lovely, and as said, not as focused as a pure puzzler, but still no other distractions than this and the plot. You just think a lot and get some mystery cheese. Come on, play this work of brilliance. And don't worry, it's a tragedy, but not so much so that you will have to use every cause of death. I mean, it's not a cruise ship. Hooray for cheap shots, which actually I'm not an expert in, but but that may be set on a cruise ship too.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.